Political scientists have observed that the ideologies of political parties can often be mapped along a single left-right axis. Perhaps this is why many modern societies have a political landscape that is consistently dominated by two major factions, each belonging to different sides of the axis. There are many labels we could give to either side, but for reasons that will become apparent, let's call them the progressives and the conservatives. In this video, we will give a utilitarian interpretation of their function. To do so, we will need to describe the development and evolution of rules in a consequentialist setting. Rules, even for a utilitarian, can serve many purposes and may be quite useful in the pursuit of the maximization of happiness for all. They provide a rudimentary moral guidance in cases where we are not inclined or don't have the time to think deeply about how we ought to act. They are simple enough to get ingrained in our habits and are thus transmitted effortlessly through time and space. They discourage a lot of immoral behavior, and so on and so forth. A rule or norm might be developed gradually from a societal process, or more abruptly from some imposition from above, and in other ways still. A typical birth is from a reasoned, utilitarian approach. For instance, after noticing that in the summer more food is produced than in the winter, a society could establish a rule that requires everybody to store away a certain amount of food they produce for the tougher times. When it is first instituted, a norm produces a certain amount of happiness or sadness. If in most cases it leads to outcomes with increased overall eudaimonia, then it is a positive utility rule. A useful rule, like the one we have given as an example. If instead obeying the rule in most cases brings suffering, then it's a bad rule that should be eliminated. Now, although to each rule we can in principle assign the utility value it produces, this quantity is not fixed in time nor space. Indeed, the usefulness of a rule depends on the historical period and on the environment of application. Again, let's give an example. In ancient hunter-gatherer societies, a cultural norm was that to teach adolescents how to hunt. Given that a large part of the sustainment for these societies was due to meat, and agriculture hadn't yet been discovered, it would make perfect sense to have such a rule that likely, in those times, produced happiness. If instead we estimate the utility of this cultural norm in today's society, we quickly notice that meticulously teaching kids how to hunt would not be that conducive to increasing overall happiness. Given the progress humanity has made in fields like agriculture, there is less need for such teachings. Efforts would be better spent elsewhere. The example we have given showcases a very general occurrence. As we have said, the utility a rule produces is in constant variation through time. What typically happens is that through technological innovations and new developments, some rules tend to gradually become less useful with the passing of time. Some may even become damaging. Thus, in a utilitarian setting, norms need refinements and substitutions. If we want to keep our rules fresh and useful, we need an intelligent updating mechanism for them. So far, so good. At this point, we can bring in again the two major political factions. How do they fit in with the utilitarian account of rules we have just given? Well, under our utilitarian interpretation, both sides should oversee the updating of rules, but with different jobs. Progressives propose the creation of new rules and the refinement of existing ones. They should discover what rules are no longer creating happiness, or what norms never brought happiness in the first place, to then change them. They are forward-looking, because they are continuously looking at possible new norms that could increase utility, leaving behind the old ones. Conservatives instead identify which rules need preserving because they are still producing happiness. They look at existing or past rules and attempt to evaluate their usefulness. If they are deemed more useful than any new rule, then a conservative should propose their maintainment or reinstatement. Conservatives generally look backwards in time, because they are continuously looking at old or present rules that could increase utility, leaving in the background new ones. Under this interpretation, both political philosophies have very important and crucial roles regarding norm creation with the objective of happiness maximization. In principle, no one is more important than the other, and they both have pitfalls they must be careful not to fall into. On one hand, a common pitfall for progressives is trying to advance a norm before the social, cultural, and technological advancements allow it to be a rule that creates happiness. An obvious example of this mistake could be imposing the rule that in ancient societies all children should receive a formal humanistic and scientific full-time education until 18 years of age, something that today in many places we take for granted. Of course, ancient civilizations had different life expectancies and different practical necessities. Imposing such a long time in education to all children could be catastrophic for their societies. The norm would be too far ahead of its time. On the other hand, a common pitfall for conservatives is to cling on to an old rule that is no longer producing happiness, because the times have changed. An obvious example of this mistake could be wanting the re-establishment of ancient gender roles in modern Western societies. Today we would see little need in this social system given our current situation. Such a rule would likely be quite damaging to overall happiness. Lovely, this utilitarian interpretation of a two-party system as the two overseers of norm creation is quite simple, elegant, and conciliatory, but it is a simplified theoretical account. In practice, parties don't accurately follow this archetype all the time. Sometimes the conservatives can play the role of the progressives, and vice versa. Moreover, parties can make mistakes. They can misevaluate the utility a norm is producing or would produce. So third parties can step in with the purpose of proposing a program that gets the eudaimonic calculations right, or with new useful rules that both major political parties did not think about. Nonetheless, the utilitarian interpretation of politics we have presented is a viewpoint that we believe could be very beneficial in our current climate, where the two major political factions don't see the other one as useful and purposeful. Rather, both sides see the other as the Antichrist. Indeed, polarization appears to be on the rise, and our tribalistic approach to politics is not helping. There are likely many culprits for this fact. We have developed technologies that manage to exploit our biases better and better. We tend to see political affiliations more as a group identity than as an evaluation of policies. We have an overabundance of bad information, and so on and so forth. Adopting a more panoramic, non-partisan view of politics could be a good starting point to solve some of these issues. But this is not the video to go into detail about these matters. See you soon. Lots of eudaimonia to all.